For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. The 1981 season was an atrocious season for the Los Angeles Rams. After years of being near the top of the food chain in the NFC, where they were consistently one of the best teams in football and were making the playoffs on an annual basis, it all fell apart in 1981. From 1973 to 80, whether Chuck Knox was the man in charge or Ray Malavasi from 1978 on, the Rams made the playoffs in all 8 seasons. And every single season of those 8, they either won at least 10 games or they made it to the Super Bowl. From 1973 to 80, they were 86-31, winning close to 74% of the games that they played in during that time frame. But in 1981, they were 6-10. For the first time in nearly a decade, they were a legitimately bad football team. Dan Pastorini, once a great quarterback, became unplayable, throwing 2 touchdowns and 14 interceptions on the season, putting together one of the worst touchdown-to-interception ratios of the modern era. An offense that ranked 3rd in points scored in 1980 fell to 21st out of 28 teams, and a defense that ranked 7th in points allowed in 1980 fell to 17th, comfortably in the bottom half of the league. The Rams were one of the favorites to win the Super Bowl entering the 1981 season, just as they were for much of the past decade. Only the Philadelphia Eagles and Dallas Cowboys had better odds in the NFC to make it. Alas, it did not happen, and 1981 was the beginning of the end for Ray Malavasi and his tenure as the head coach of the Rams. And most people would agree when it came to the 1981 Rams that everything went south during this game right here, a Sunday night thrashing at the hands of the Dallas Cowboys. After this game, the wheels began to fall completely off the bus, and the Malavasi tenure came to an almost overnight demise. Entering this game, the Rams were 4-2. Afterwards, including the 1982 season, they would win just 3 of their next 18 games. And what you might not know about this game is that the Rams played the Cowboys under just about the worst conditions possible. You know what was really tough back in the early 1980s? Or really, any of those 20-some-odd years that Tom Landry had the Cowboys atop the football world? Beating the Dallas Cowboys. You know what's even tougher? Beating them while hungover. Because in 1981, for that game against the Cowboys, the Rams were hungover. And I don't mean 1 or 2 guys. I mean a fairly substantial contingency of the team was hungover, which is not exactly the most ideal of conditions to play a football game under. Because this is the story of the time that the Los Angeles Rams played a game while hungover. Before I talk about the Rams actually being hungover and what exactly went down before the game and during the game, we need some context to understand the importance of this game and what exactly this game meant for both teams. It's October 18th, 1981. It's week 7 of the NFL season, and as we're heading to the halfway point of the year, we've got a big game on our hands down at Texas Stadium under the lights on a special but confusing Sunday night edition of Monday Night Football between the Los Angeles Rams and the Dallas Cowboys. Entering the season, this was one of the most highly anticipated matchups, hence why it was in front of a national audience. And it's not hard to see why, considering the success of both teams in recent years, and in 1981 to start off. In one corner, you have the Dallas Cowboys, who entered this one at 4-2, needing this win badly to keep pace with the undefeated Philadelphia Eagles for first place in the NFC East. In the other corner, you have the Los Angeles Rams, who entered this one at 4-2, salvaging their season after an 0-2 start to rattle off 4 straight wins, and become not just the hottest team in football, but one of the most exciting teams in football, as their 160 points scored through 6 games gave them the best offense in the NFC and the second best offense in the entire NFL, only behind the San Diego Chargers. If the Rams won this game, then they'd keep pace with the 49ers for first place in the NFC West, as the 49ers also enter that week with a 4-2 record. The winner of this game puts themselves in a pretty good position to make the playoffs and possibly even win the division, bypassing the wildcard round. The loser of this game? Well, they would have some work to do. Now, what's interesting about this game was the start time, as this game started at 9 o'clock Eastern, so 8 o'clock in Dallas. This was, in essence, a Monday Night Football game, just on a Sunday. ABC did these Sunday night games to give fans a triple header once a year back then, and you can learn more about why that was the case, and why we didn't see Sunday Night Football as a permanent fixture sooner by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But what this meant was that, understandably, the rules for teams would be a bit different. The routines would be different. How you handle the game was different. Before, you're playing a game at 1 o'clock local time, so it's an early night so that you can get up early and get to the stadium and warm up. Now, with a game at 8 o'clock local time, you've got the entire day to kill, so you don't need to get up bright and early. You can sleep in, you can stay out a little bit later than you would for a regular week, and you can adjust your routine. It's human nature. It's almost like how you plan your day differently if you have to be at the airport to catch an 8 a.m. flight versus if you have to be at the airport to catch a 6 p.m. flight. Well, that was the case with the Rams, as the players were allowed to be out until midnight. I couldn't find any information on what curfew usually was for the Rams with an afternoon game, but for any night games that they had with Malavasi as the head coach, bed check was at midnight, meaning that the lights had to be off and they had to be asleep by the time the new day started. And for whatever reason, a fair amount of Rams did not get that memo when it came to this game that you've been watching this whole time. Because at 1 a.m., there were 5 Rams players who were still out and who happened to be at the hotel bar drinking and well past curfew and the bed check. For some perspective, a roster had 45 players on it back in 1981, which meant that 1 out of every 9 Rams players were out past curfew and were drinking, completely unaware that they needed to be in bed and not be doing that, and not cognizant of the fact that they'd be hungover for a game that was taking place, technically, later that day. At 1 a.m., 5 Ram players were dragged out of the hotel bar by 2 assistant coaches, who conducted the bed checks at midnight and had no idea where the players were. Always a good sign when that happens. Always a good sign when, right before one of the biggest games of the season, and a game that you have to maintain your place on first place of the division, and a game that could knock you out of the playoff picture, depending on the other results that occur that day, since there were a whole slew of teams at 4-2, you've got 1/9 of your team drinking it out at the bar and violating team rules. Now, to be fair, head coach Ray Malavasi said that there was a misunderstanding between his players and himself with regards to the curfew time and the bed check. He said that bed check was not until midnight, and the players were out of the bar by 11:55. Plus, he said that the 5 players were not drinking. So according to the head coach, this was just a miscommunication. The players were compliant, and they were at the bar but weren't drinking, even though all reports suggested otherwise. Let's take Malavasi's word for this for 1 second. Now, let's think about this for more than 5 seconds. Because when you do that, you'll realize that nothing about Malavasi's quote makes any sense. Nothing about this quote adds up, and it is laughable as to all 3 points he made. Number 1, because it was a night game, there was a misunderstanding about curfew? How does that make any sense? This wasn't your first night game of the season. This wasn't your first rodeo. Not even 3 weeks before, on September 28th, you played a Monday Night Football game on the road against the Chicago Bears, a game which the Rams won 24-7. That game also started at 8 o'clock local time, just like this Cowboys game. I'm going to take a wild guess and say that whatever your curfew rules were, said rules were in effect for that game. If this was your first night game, okay, maybe I can buy that. But this literally just happened, and you had 3 night games in 1980 when there wasn't a lot of roster turnover, relatively speaking. Plus, preseason games took place at night. I'm assuming the curfew rules were in place there. The players knew this was a thing. There should not have been any miscommunication. This is such a bad defense that it hurts me. Number 2, all 5 of the players were out of the bar at 11:55, and bed check wasn't until midnight? How does that make any sense? The assistant coaches had to drag them out of the bar at 1 o'clock in the morning. Last time I checked, 1 a.m. is not the same as 11:55. It's more than an hour later. One of those times is not past curfew, while the other time is significantly past curfew. And if all sources say that the Rams were staying out at 1 in the morning, and you come out and say, well, it's true that they were out, but it wasn't that late, it was 11:55, conveniently a few minutes before curfew, I'm inclined to not take your word for it. Plus, let's say that they left the bar at 11:55. They had to be in bed at midnight with the lights out. I'm not sure of too many people who can leave a hotel bar at 11:55 and be asleep at midnight. If you can do that, I want your superpower immediately. Especially because you probably wouldn't even be getting into your room until 11:58 at the earliest, considering that you have to wait for the hotel lobby elevator. You're telling me it's possible to leave the bar at 11:55, get the elevator to go to your room, enter your room, go to the bathroom and brush your teeth and do whatever you have to do before bed, and then be in bed with the lights out and be asleep 5 minutes later? For some perspective, one of the top songs of 1981 was the Stars on 45 medley, which was a mix of Beatles songs, and then Sugar Sugar by the Archies for some reason that I have no idea why. It's a great medley, but that always confused me. Anyways, besides the point. If you're watching this video, next time you're in a hotel, try this out. Leave the hotel bar, and the moment you leave the bar, start the song. By the end of the song, you need to be in your room, go to the bathroom, brush your teeth, and then be in bed with the lights out and sound asleep. It is not possible. Try that out, and you'll realize just how full of crap Malavasi is with that statement. Because even if they left the bar at 11:55 like Malavasi said, they wouldn't have complied with the curfew anyways. And if that wasn't enough, if the bed check was at midnight, then how would the assistant coaches who dragged them out know that they weren't there and know to check the hotel bar well before that? There are so many plot holes to the story concocted by Malavasi here that it hurts my head to try and follow and give him even the slightest benefit of the doubt. But we're not done yet, because number 3, you're really saying that the players weren't drinking? Why the heck would they be at the bar and not be drinking? They're not ordering food and eating. They're not listening to live music. I highly doubt this hotel had live music at midnight anyways. They're not trying to pick up women, especially because they can't have women enter the room. You go to a bar, a hotel bar, to drink. That's like saying that, yes, I was at the gym the other day, but I wasn't there to work out. Like, why would I be at the gym otherwise? What is the purpose? These guys just happen to be in a place where the primary purpose is for people to get drunk, and conveniently they left the place 5 minutes before they had to be asleep? Sure. And I've got beautiful waterfront property where you can see the Pacific Ocean in Phoenix, Arizona. So yeah, Malavasi can try and say whatever he wants about the situation, but we all know he's full of it, because this was a laughable explanation as to what really went down that no one, not even a 10-year-old, would buy for 1 second. Which raises the obvious question. How the heck did the Rams play? They were hungover. They were not in the right state of mind, but would that impact their play in the slightest bit? Well, judging by the highlights of the game that you've been watching this whole time, or rather, lowlights if you're a Rams fan, I think you could take a wild guess and say that this definitely impacted them in some capacity. Turns out, it's tough to play football well when you're drunk. When all was said and done, the Rams lost by a final score of 29-17, and the game started out in disastrous fashion for them, as on their first 4 possessions, the Rams went 3 and out, threw an interception, threw another interception, and then took a safety. Midway through the second quarter, the Cowboys were up 19-0, up by 3 scores, and they had this one completely locked up, as the Rams never made it a one-possession game outside of the first quarter when it was 0-0 and 7-0. Dallas racked up 496 yards of total offense, picking up 5.2 yards per carry on a whopping 221 rushing yards, while the Rams turned it over 3 times and committed 10 penalties, all while starting quarterback Pat Hayden completed less than 50% of his passes. It was a bad game all around for the Rams. It was a bad start, it was a bad offensive showing, it was a bad defensive showing, and nothing whatsoever went right. I know it was only a 12-point game, but trust me, it felt like double that. It was deceiving. This was one of those games where the final score is not an indication whatsoever of just how in control the Cowboys were. The Rams' performance on this day, on the national stage in front of the entire country, was ugly with a capital U. Now, when it comes to the game between these two teams behind me right here, am I saying that the Rams win this one if they were not hungover? Absolutely not. The Cowboys were the better team, and based on how the Rams play the rest of the season, and how the Cowboys play the rest of the season, and the fact that the Cowboys were a dominant team at Texas Stadium around this time, not having lost a home game at Texas Stadium since Roger Staubach retired, I'm taking the Cowboys 99 times out of 100. Having said that, though, this definitely didn't help. It's like if I'm golfing in a skins match 1v1 against Phil Mickelson, and I show up hungover. Now, am I saying that I would have beat Phil Mickelson if I wasn't hungover? Absolutely not. But did it help the fact that I was hungover? God, no. No, not at all. This debacle against the Cowboys was the beginning of the end for the Rams. Their downfall in 1981 started with this game. The end of the Ray Malavasi era started with this game. Everything that went wrong for the Rams in 1981 stemmed from this game. Remember, they had the second best offensive football entering this game, and they ended the season 21st. This game was a bad omen of things to come, and it's not hard to see why the Rams lost this game when you hear stories like this. Because if Ram fans were drinking on that Sunday night to forget what they just witnessed, and to ease the pain of a horrible loss to the Cowboys, they can at least take solace in the fact that Ram players were way ahead of them in that regard. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.